induced subgraph. It's a very easy one while seeing with an example. Before that, the definition is a vertex induced subgraph is one that consists of sum of the vertices. This is very important. Sum of the vertices of the original graph and all the edges that connect them in the original graph. That we have to take it. So for the vertex induced subgraph, the first step you have to collect some of the vertices from the original graph. And the second step, what are the edges that are adjacent in the original graph that we have to draw here. So you can see with an example, this is an example that is K5, complete graph K5. So I am selecting some of the vertices, namely V2, V5, V4, V3. So 4 vertices I am taking here. So I have to draw the 4 vertices. So here V5, V3, then V4. So the first condition is okay. The second condition, what are the edges that are adjacent in the original graph should be drawn here. So here you can see V5 to V2 there is an edge. So I must draw here. Then V2 to V3 I have an edge in the original graph that I have to draw. Again V5 to V4 I have an edge in the original graph. Again V4 to V3. Not only that, V5 to V3 also there be edge and V2 to V4 there be an edge. So we can say that this is a vertex induced subgraph. And you can see what is not a vertex induced subgraph means I have to draw this 4 vertices, that is V5, this is V5, V2, V3, then V4. So I am drawing the edges here V5 to V2 and V2 to V3. These are the edges already in the original graph that I am drawing. Okay. But I am not drawing these two. If it's so, it is not an vertex induced subgraph. Because for the vertex induced subgraph, if you take some of the vertices and what are the possibility of the edges have in the original graph, that must be drawn here. So here you can see for this 4 vertices, I have these edges in the original graph. So all the possibilities must be drawn here. But here I took some of the vertices and drawn just these 4 edges and not drawn this 2 edges. If it's so, it is not a vertex induced subgraph. So what are the edges between these 4 vertices must be drawn. So this is the vertex induced subgraph. If it's so, you can see what about the edge induced subgraph. Just you can see the opposite of this. Edge induced subgraph means you must take some of the edges from the original graph. Okay. And the vertices that are at their end points. So here also I took the same example that K5, the complete graph. Here I took the number of edges, sum of the edges from the original graph. So I am taking the edges as 1, 2, this is 1, 2, this is 7. Yes, 7. Then I am taking 10. Okay, the edges I have to concentrate. So I am drawing the edges here. 1, then 2, then 7. This is 7, right? 7 and then 10. I have to check whether this is a edge induced subgraph or not. So for that I need to see the end points. So the end points here is this is 1, right? So the edges here is V1 and this is V5, right? And this I am taking 2. So the end point here is V2. And here for the 7, the end point here is V3. And for V2, the end point here is, this is 10. The end point here is V4. So this is edge induced subgraph. Okay. So this is edge induced subgraph. So you can see another one example. Here also I am taking some of the edges, namely 1, 2 and 4 I am taking. So this is 4. Okay. Some of the edges from the version graph. So I have to draw 1, then 2, then 4. Okay. So let's see the vertices 1 which connecting here as V1, then V5 and here V2 and here it is V4 and V3. This also edge-induced subgraph, but one thing, this is disconnected graph because it is not connected between these two, right? So it is said to be disconnected graph, or else we can say that this is a edge-induced subgraph. So the difference between the vertex-induced and edge-induced means you have to collect some of the vertices from the original graph, and what are the edges that the original graph connecting these vertices, that is said to be the vertex-induced subgraph. But for the edge-induced subgraph, some of the edges of the original graph you have to choose it, and what are the vertices that connecting from the original graph, that we have to draw it. So that is said to be the edge-induced subgraph. So now we can see what is spanning subgraph. It's a very easy one. We can see the number of vertices in the original graph and the new graph whose vertices also should be equal. Okay. So the number of vertices in the original graph and the number of vertices in the spanning subgraph will be equal. So the edges is not compulsory as like the original graph. So here I am drawing 1, then 6. The number of vertices from the original graph and this graph should be equal. That is very, very important here. And now I am drawing the graph here. This, the edge is there. Then this edge is there. Then I am drawing this. And here I am drawing. And I have this edge. This is said to be the spanning subgraph. So that not all the edges are compulsory, but compulsory all the vertices should be there as like the original graph. So here it is 0, 4, and here I am drawing the edges. The other one I am taking this. The edges in the original graph should be here, okay, but not all the edges. Okay, right. So this is also the spanning subgraph. This is spanning subgraph and this is spanning subgraph. Now what is not a spanning subgraph means if I am drawing this edge, okay, it is not a spanning subgraph. Reason, you can see in the original graph there is no edge between 6 and 3, but I drawn here as 6 and 3. It is not a spanning subgraph. Okay, and another one spanning, not a spanning subgraph means if I am taking the vertices 1, 2, 3, 6, 5. Okay, and I am drawing all the edges. The possibility of the edges I am drawing. This is not a spanning subgraph. The reason here, the number of vertices as like the original graph is not there because here 4 is there. Here I draw which has no vertex like 4. So this is not a spanning subgraph. So for the spanning subgraph, the main one, the number of vertices in the original graph and the subgraph whose vertices will be equal if it's so, that is spanning subgraph. Thank you. Hope it will be helpful for you.